Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a review. This is for AEG and John D. Clare's newest game. It's called ECOS, The First Continent. It is a brand new game all about building up the ecosystem. Imagine that planet Earth didn't develop the way it did. You are actually creating planet Earth by placing deserts, grasslands, and water and inhabiting it with different varieties of animals.
Yeah, not only animals, but trees and mountains, and all of this is going to be done with these cards you have in front of you in a tableau. They're going to be activated in a very unique way with simultaneous play and an aging mechanism for the cards that is really, really cool.
All right, so to start the game, you can start with one of two different ways. You can start with pre-constructed decks in which all the players will have a deck of cards. 3 starting cards are going to be placed face up in front of them, or you can start by drafting, which is probably the way that more experienced gamers are going to want to play the game because they can craft their deck of cards or their hand of cards in a very unique way in order to influence that ecosystem they're going to play. Also, we have a game in progress, but the game is only going to start with 4 tiles, and you're going to build out these tiles through the course of the game.
Yeah, not only are you going to build out the world with these tiles, but like we said earlier, you're going to have trees on them, mountains on them, and there's rules for all of this, as well as animals. Now, we don't have any animals out here right now, but these animals are going to come out quite a bit. All of this, again, depends on the cards that you have in front of you, because some of these cards are going to add tiles. Some of them are going to add animals. Some of them aren't going to do either of those things, and some of these cards are going to score points. And again, none of those cards are going to happen until you've fulfilled them with a very unique and specific way.
As mentioned, each player is going to start with 3 cards face up in front of them. Each of these cards is going to have a number of different icons or elements on the left-hand side. These are the elements that you have to use in order to activate that card. And in order to activate that card, you're going to use energy cubes. All the players are going to start with 7 energy cubes. So you have a finite number of energy cubes that you can place on your cards. However, there's opportunity to gather more in the game by using your dial. This is one of the cooler aspects in the game. In the center of the dial, it's going to show you the distribution of tiles or element tiles in the bag, which we'll talk about in just a moment. However, on the outside of the dial are the different powers or abilities that you can use when this dial is spun to a very specific thing face up in front of you. We'll talk about that when we start talking about the game. The last thing we really want to talk about before we start explaining the gameplay is this bag of elements, which is really cool.
Yeah, this element bag is going to be filled with these nice chunky tokens, each of which have one of the elements on them. There are 8 elements, or rather 7, and then 1 wild. The Harbinger, who is effectively the first player in the game, is going to pull one of these elements, announce it, place it down on the table, and everyone is then going to take one of their energy cubes and potentially place it on one of their cards that they have face up in front of them with the corresponding energy. Now, if you don't want to do that, or you can't because you don't have that particular energy open, you can take that dial that Jeremy mentioned and rotate it. This is going to rotate in this direction, starting with the start on top, and then once it rotates to the 3rd position, you're able to, if you want to, activate a power as well as the 4th position.
Yeah, and that first player is going to continue to draw tiles from that bag with each of the players simultaneously using energy cubes to fill up their cards until they pull the wild. And there's only 2 wilds in the entire bag. When that happens, the bag is going to pass to the next player. So why are you filling up these cards? This is the whole crux of the game. Each of these cards you have in front of you is going to have a number of different icons, which we already discussed on the left-hand side. When that fills up, you get to activate the card in turn order. So there may be multiple people on a turn that get to activate their cards. Each of the cards has to be activated from top to bottom, and you have to do the very first action in order to do the rest. So you can't just pick and choose the actions on that card. All of these cards have a wide variety of different things they can do. They can introduce trees to terrain. They can introduce new tiles to the terrain. They can introduce mountains. They can introduce one of the 13 different animals into the game. All the animals having very specific habitats, either the grasslands, the desert, or the water, where they have to live. And you're going to go down through this card in order, doing each of these actions. And when you're done with that actions, the card is either discarded out of the game permanently, or it is rotated in a clockwise fashion because each of these cards has a number of leaves around the outside of the card telling you how many different actions or times you can use that card. If you ever get to the 1 space and you use it for the final time, the card is discarded. So, as you can see, some of the really powerful cards in the game you can only use once.
Yeah, for example, I have this card here that has a ton of different actions that you're able to take, including at the very top, placing a shark on the board. You can imagine the shark's probably going to feed on some of the other animals. You'll also notice here on the left-hand side, there's a ton of energy or element tokens that you have to use to fulfill this. And then finally at the top, you see this has just one leaf. You're going to fire this card off once, and then you're going to be done with that card.
There are two different types of cards, and on the front side, they have a wide range of different abilities. The two very different types of cards are your rule-building cards, which are your reddish-brown colored, and then your victory point cards, which are your blue. Each player is going to start with an X number of those, depending on whether or not you draft the cards or start with a starting deck. However, on the front side of the cards, you have a wide range of them. You have the green ones, which are typically going to introduce new things into the world. And the red ones, which David just showed you with the shark, are cards and abilities that typically are going to destroy the landscape. Yeah. They may introduce things, but they're going to eat other things. They're going to flip tiles. They're going to remove tiles from the game, and so forth. All the victory points that you collect on your turn are going to be tracked on this board, and each player is going to compete to try to get to an X number of victory points. In a long game, you're going to play to 80. In a short game, you're going to play to 60. And remember, that first player is going to keep drawing tiles every turn until they get to that wild tile.
Yeah, and that's effectively the game. Now, we didn't get down into a lot of the details because we'll probably touch on some of those as we go through our pros and cons during the review. So what do you think?
All right, so number one, this is a game from John D. Clare. If you're not familiar with the name, you probably should be. He did Edge of Darkness. He did Mystic Veil. He's done a lot of big, space-based, big, huge games for AEG. This is kind of a calmer, more relaxed style of game, but there's a lot of meat in this game. This is truly an engine-building game that you're going to be frustrated with the first time that you play it because you're not going to quite understand how the cards work. Yeah. However, this is a game that with repeated play, there's a ton of depth in this, especially when you start doing the drafting. All right, so pro number one for me is that engine building. That engine building is awesome. There are times in a game when you're going to finish off a card with a number of energy, and you're going to use those actions. Those actions may introduce something that's going to give you a lot of points, and it may introduce wilds to other cards, in which you're then going to chain that card, finish that ability, and then possibly do a third. So these really cool engines that once you get the right cards into your display, you're going to be able to power a lot of different things going on for once.
Yeah, there's some interesting cards. In fact, we mentioned this earlier. The different elements have some rarity to them. Some of them are more plentiful in the bag, some of them aren't plentiful at all. But you might find a card that is activated with one of the more common elements that might provide you one of the rarer elements. So you can start chaining these things together, fire off this card, and that lets me fire off this card. So as you can tell, it really does give you those great, just satisfying combos in a game like this.
And one of the frustrating but also awesome things about the game is the first time we played it a little bit wrong. And once you understand how to play the game right, you need to play it this way. So when you're building or drafting your cards, you want to build for a very specific style of play. That may be something that moves animals across the terrain in order to give victory points. It may be a deck of cards or a display of cards that allows you to eat other animals. There may be cards that give you points for trees. But if you're not getting the right cards through the draft, there's also cards that you can gain from these two deck of cards. And what we did wrong the first time we played it is we were just drawing two cards off the top and picking one. However, all those cards that are discarded when doing so become a splay of cards that you can now choose from, meaning that if one player is not going heavy into one strategy that you need to get, you can also choose not to take these cards, but take this giant splay of cards to be able to use.
Yeah, exactly. This definitely gives players a lot more motivation to take a look up there to see what cards have come up, because if the right card comes up for your engine, you absolutely want to take the time to gain that card. There's a couple ways to gain that card. There's a number of cards that you'll play and activate that might allow you to gain a card, but the simplest way is back to this dial. We didn't mention this, but once it's rotated around to the third spot, you're able to actually gain a card. If you wait till the fourth spot, you're able to play a card, or instead of playing a card, you can get another one of those energy cubes. We mentioned these energy cubes earlier, and this is one of my pros. I have a lot of pros for this game. But these energy cubes, in games like this typically, like Rise of Augustus, things like that, you generally have a somewhat limited pool. In this game, you could be turning this dial as much as you possibly want in this game, getting a lot of cubes to fulfill those beefier cards, because once you have a few cards out that have a lot of things to fulfill, you're going to find yourself running out of cubes. The game also has flexibility, which I enjoy, in that once you have all your cubes out on your cards, if something is pulled from the bag and you're like, I don't have any more cubes, you can actually take a cube off of a card that you've already placed and place it instead, so you can rearrange to some degree, but only when an element is drawn.
Yeah, that's an awesome part of the game. Also, that whole engine building part of it too, that you're keeping these cards usually for a longer duration of time than just a one and done, which is really cool. One of the things I really love too about the game is the introduction of the animals. Like, each of these animals has their own natural abilities built into the card. So some of them, like the antelopes, which you use very effectively in one of the games, they want to breed. They want to breed as much as they can and then move across the plains in order to gain a lot of victory points. The shark, as you mentioned, or the orca whale, well, they want to hunt. So as people start to inhabit the ocean, they're naturally going to go out there and use those as prey. So if you can start building those chains together, it's really, really cool. The components themselves, we'll talk about those because it's obviously here on the table and they look amazing. Each of these different trays that houses all of the different animals has their own individual slots, and also they have these covers that go over them and slide in to protect them while they're in the box. So as you move and take the game from one location to another, you can actually travel with it without worried about baggies, and they're all right there labeled clearly so you can see all the different tokens right on the front of the boxes themselves.
Yeah, it's kind of nice in a nostalgic way to see the use of cardboard like this in such a really good storage solution. There are a ton of little animal tokens in this game, and if you had to get these things out of bags every time you played, it would be a little bit of a drain on the setup and teardown of this game. So that is a beautiful addition to this. One other thing I want to mention too, that they just some of those finer touches, this one having to do more with gameplay. Jeremy mentioned earlier, some of these cards have the green and red backs, but also on the front, the green and red strips, so that when you see a red strip card out on the table, without reading the card, you know that an opponent might have a card that's going to do something negative or tear down some of the world we've created. So you might want to take note of that. The rulebook even suggests that once you play a card like that, you announce, hey everybody, I'm playing one of these cards. But if they don't and someone forgets, you always have that reminder of looking around the table, quickly identifying without reading all the cards, oh, I need to pay attention to what that card does.
Do you have any more pros before I get into negatives?
No, I mean, to round off on the pros, there's a lot of things this game does really, really well that I like. I could go on, but this is a gem from Gen Con that I didn't get a chance to play while we were at Gen Con, but afterwards, I'm really, really glad that we did.
So I will go into my final pro, and then it kind of leads into the con as well. The fact that this game is all simultaneous play is a huge benefit. You're always involved in the turn. Even though you may be the first player, you're pulling a tile which everyone gets to do something with, which is a really, really fun aspect of the game. However, the con of that is that some of the turns can be a long while. Some of them can have like 3 or 4 combos that go off at once, so you're waiting for the thing to come around. So it can drag a little bit if you're not actually activating your thing, but it's a small amount of time, so it's not a huge, huge negative at all.
Yeah, that's that classic pro/con that we see in a lot of these engine building games where you're firing off a crazy combo. Because it's a pro when you're doing it, obviously. Yes. It feels like a little bit of a con when someone else is doing it if you don't have the patience to wait for them to do it. But either way, it's great when we see a game that allows you to do a lot of things and have really satisfying turns. That's sort of one of my big things, and this game is absolutely filled with them.
One of the other cons that people could feel is there is some player interaction in this game. I love the fact that you can mess with other people's plans. If you see them going heavy on antelope, which you did,
you ate some of them.
I ate some of them with the lion, so you can interact with other players. Some people like building their own engines, hence an engine builder, but this is an engine builder that you can deconstruct if you have the right kind of cards. This is a game that gets better the more times you play it, because obviously you start to learn the cards, you start to understand how to draft better, how to build the proper ecosystem that can build points according to the cards that you have, and the fact that you have to look through these discarded piles of cards in order to get the right type of things. First-time players are going to be at a disadvantage because they're not going to know how to score points natively. They're going to be just using the cards in their hand without realizing that there's some powerful cards in here that they either need to hunt for or try to find in that discard pile.
Yeah, the last thing I would say that's probably neither a pro or a con, more of a warning, is first-time players, if everyone on the table is a first-time player, definitely use those pre-constructed decks the first game or two until you can really start to get to know how the game works. Once you understand how the game works, even if you had this strategy as opposed to this strategy, you'll get a sense because someone else at the table is going to use a variety of different strategies, so you'll get some experience there. And definitely stay aware of everything that's going on the board.
Yeah.
Particularly this pile right here. As this pile stacks up, you're going to want to potentially even pick that up from time to time just to look through it. Because I found in the game we played where we weren't doing that rule correctly, I didn't have the proper motivation to really go and gain a lot of cards because you start with a fair amount. But once those cards are face up, you definitely want to take a peek there because there might be a perfect card. And when you have an engine builder and you can get 3 or 4 cards that really work well together, use them to your advantage as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this game. Obviously a game that is infinitely expandable, introducing possibly new terrain, new animals, new cards. Very, very solid game from AEG and John D. Clare. 2 to 6 players. If you have any questions about the game, make comments below. It's going to be released at Essen, we believe. And we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.